everyone, it's Nina and welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to be doing a book haul. I hadn't realized it, but it's been almost 6 months since the last one of these videos that I made. I think I have between like 20 and 30 to show to you today. However, I am going to exclude the books that I bought and then read and then decided to unhaul from this video, since a lot of those are already listed on my Pango Books and some of them I've already sold, so I figured I'd just like cut out that entire category. However, I still do have a lot of books that I wanted to show you guys. I think we're going to go through this video talking about the books in the different genre categories. So with that intro out of the way, let's get into the video. I think starting off, I'll do all the books in kind of like the miscellaneous category, and then we'll get to the two largest categories, which are obviously YA fantasy and adult fantasy. The first one is actually one I showed in a recent reading vlog, and that was The Lamplighters by Emma Stonks, or Emma Stonix. Still not sure how to pronounce her last name. This is a literary thriller that is about 3 lighthouse keepers that go missing. I forget where I heard about this book initially. It might have been from another booktuber, or I just found it when I was looking through the story graph, and I ended up finding this copy secondhand at a thrift store for $1, so I knew I had to take it home with me. The next books I have are the only 2 poetry collections I have bought, / the only 2 poetry collections that I own, and I got them in pretty quick succession from each other. The first one is The Orange and Other Poems by Wendy Cope. This is just the cutest, like, tiny little Faber and Faber new edition of this poem that, if you've never heard of The Orange, it's a pretty famous, I don't want to say like Instagram poem, but it's kind of one that is very universally loved by a lot of people, both in and out of like the book sphere, which makes perfect sense because it is such a like sweet, like genuine, heartfelt poem that resonates with a lot of people. And I like it too, so I did want to check out some of Wendy Cope's other poems. I know that The Orange is originally from a different poetry collection of hers, but I guess they kind of like rebound it with some of her other poetry in this version. So very excited to eventually check this out. To contrast the very tiny poetry collection of The Orange, I also have Leaves of Grass by Walt Whitman. This is a larger poetry collection that originally was just 12 poems but has been expanded and edited over the course of many decades throughout the entirety of Walt Whitman's life. This is kind of his magnum opus in terms of poetry, and I've been very interested in checking it out. Next book I have to add to this haul is this edition of The Odyssey by Homer. This one is the Barnes & Noble Classics edition that's translated by George Herbert Palmer. I was pretty excited when I found this in a little free library. However, I don't know if I will be keeping this in the long run because I have heard that some of the newer editions and translations of this book, particularly ones that are done by women, tend to kind of pick up on a lot of nuances that a lot of like more traditional older male translators have missed out on in terms of like the proper analysis of the female characters in this work, as well as in the Iliad. So I am thinking I might eventually switch this out for a different translation in the future if I don't like this one, but I have to do a little bit more research before I decide on that. And the last in the kind of like miscellaneous category I have is Real Life by Brandon Taylor. This is a adult contemporary literary fiction that follows our main character, who is a Black queer man studying biochemistry in college for his PhD in a, I think, somewhat conservative Midwestern town. That's like the general vibe of the story. I don't know what like the crux or like main like conflict of the story is, but I've heard this one is really good and I've wanted to check out Brandon Taylor's writing for a while now. So when I found this at like a big flea market for $1, I decided to also pick it up. Okay, now let's briefly talk about the 2 historical romances I have, both of which I've talked about and shown many times on my channel. And those are 2 of the books in the Lucky Lovers of London series. So I have book 2, which is a rulebook for Restless Rogues. I love this book so much, and I included it in a reading vlog that I'll try and link up above. This one I found secondhand for I think like $8 at a bookstore in the city that I like to go to a lot. And then when we were on vacation in North Carolina, I found the newest release that had just come out, which is The Blue Stockings Guide to Decadence, which I also read. I don't have a reading vlog for this one, but I'll try and link the wrap-up where I talked about it up above as well. I'm super excited that I have both these books in the series. I will eventually probably buy the first one, as well as I now know that next year in 2025, the 4th book in the series is going to be coming out, which I'm definitely planning on pre-ordering before it comes out. Okay, now let's move on to the 2 main categories, which is what the bulk of the books that I have bought recently are, which are YA fantasy and adult fantasy. Let's start with a set of books that are kind of bridging the middle grade to YA section, and those are the entirety of the Heroes of Olympus series by Rick Riordan. I ended up getting those books at the same flea market that I got Real Life, so they each were $1. At first I was a little bit unsure if I wanted to get them, since they are, as you just saw, pretty massive original version hardcovers. And even though I really like the Percy Jackson series, I have not yet read this series, but I definitely will be reading them in the future. Probably sometime next year I'll do like a big reading vlog reading all of them. So I figured I'd just go ahead and get all of them now, because you really can't beat $1 a book. And I'm definitely not going to be able to find that secondhand on Pango or anywhere else for any cheaper. So let's go through each of the books. Firstly, we have The Lost Hero. We have The Son of Neptune, The Mark of Athena, The House of Hades. This one I'm very, very excited to finally read, because I'm pretty sure this is the book where Nico gets confirmed to be gay. And lastly, we have The Blood of Olympus. Okay, now let's move into some of the like proper YA books. The first one I have is an Illumicrate special edition of Jade and Dragons by Amber Chen. This book I read as an ARC and really, really enjoyed it. I gave it 4 stars. And I was also excited because I knew that Illumicrate was doing this as their special edition, I think for June. And this edition is really, really beautiful. I loved the end paper art with the illustrations of the main characters. They are just so cute. Very excited that my subscription was active so that I could get this book. I think I'll just go through the other special edition books I have now. The next one is Wisteria by Adelyne Grace. This is the Barnes & Noble special edition that has special end papers as well as like a custom cover for the like hard case. This book I read and I gave 2.5 stars. It was such a huge letdown considering how much I love the first book in the series. I am still on the fence on if I'm going to keep this book. I think what I want to do is reread Foxglove, and depending on how much I like that, I might decide if I'm going to get rid of both that book and this. And Belladonna will just kind of like live in my head as just a standalone instead of being part of a series. But for right now, I am planning on keeping it, just because it looks so good with the other 2 books when they're all on the shelf together. And the last special edition I have in terms of YA books is Flyboy by Casey LeBlanc. This is a Dazzling Bookish Shop special edition. So it has this custom redesigned cover as well as sprayed edges and a little like themed bookplate with the signature of the author. This book is actually a like more so contemporary magical realism type book that I think kind of like bridges into fantasy. It's very much compared to The Night Circus in terms of like the magic and the whimsy elements in it. So very excited to eventually check this out. Okay, the next set of books, I have a ton of different YA paperbacks, and pretty much all of these I got thrifting. And the first one is one I'm really excited about, and that is I finally got a paperback copy of Sorcery of Thorns by Margaret Rogerson. I've talked about Margaret Rogerson a couple times on my channel. I really, really love her books. I think she's an amazing YA fantasy author. And I own all of her other books, so I was just kind of waiting until I could find a copy of Sorcery of Thorns used either in a Half Price Books or in another thrift store. And I did finally find this at Half Price Books when we last went to Chicago. So I'm super excited that I now have a full collection of all of her books. And I have already read this and I gave it 4 stars when I read it. But I'm definitely due for a reread soon, honestly. Okay, after that we have Siege and Storm by Leigh Bardugo. This is the second book in the Shadow and Bone trilogy. I hunted this down on Pango. I've been trying to get the original like designed covers in paperback. So now I'm just waiting to be able to get Ruining Rising in this style, and then I'll be able to read through all of the entirety of the original trilogy, which I'll probably do for a reading vlog in the future. Okay, the next book I have here is Serpent and Dove by Shelby Mahurin. This book is definitely one I'm going to be reading pretty soon. I've heard pretty good things about the entirety of this series. I know it is kind of like an enemies to lovers witch x witch hunter romance, and I think the fall is definitely going to be the perfect time of year to read this. I also have kind of an idea for a reading vlog in mind, specifically where I read this type of book. Okay, the next book I have here is Crier's War by Nina Valera. This book is, I think, a like sci-fantasy hybrid YA fantasy romance that has a lesbian main couple in it. It definitely is one of the most popular like sapphic YA fantasy romances I hear about. So I'm very excited that I was able to find this thrifting, and I'm definitely going to be checking it out soon. Next one I have here is The Chosen and the Beautiful by Ning Vo. This is a Great Gatsby retelling focusing on Jordan, who I think also has like magical powers. I know, considering what I said about my kind of dislike of self-made boys in not sharing how I feel about the Great Gatsby story being told through a YA perspective. However, I've heard a lot of good things about this book, and when I saw it thrifting, I was a little bit unsure, but I kept thinking about it, and then luckily when I went back to the thrift store like 2 weeks later, it was still there, so I decided I did want to pick it up. Hopefully I do end up enjoying this more so than I have with other Great Gatsby retellings that I've read. And the last book that I have for my YA category is The Raven Boys by Maggie Stiefvater. This book I know is incredibly beloved, kind of like an OG booktube fave. I know it's the start of a 4-book YA like fantasy romance series that I think is about a girl in a small town who kind of gets wrapped up with this group of 4 boys that all have magical powers, somehow connected to the land that they're from. I don't know, very much giving me like the Covenant vibes, I'm just very excited to see what all the hype is about, considering how much people really love this series. So again, when I saw it at the thrift store for $1, I had to pick it up. Okay, now let's move on to the last set of books I have, which are the adult fantasy books that I bought recently. The first one of those is the 5th volume of Husky and His White Cat Shizun by Rubal Buchi Rao. I checked out the series many times on my channel. I'm very much behind. I still need to read both the 4th and 5th volumes of this. The 4th one I think I showed in the last book haul that I had like 6 months ago, which I still have not made any more progress in reading that series. Previously I just kind of like added the next book that was coming out onto a pre-order, but I think I'm going to wait until I finish the 4th and the 5th volumes before I buy any more of the series, since I am unsure about how much more I want to collect of this series in the long run, since I think there's going to be like 10 books probably, and I don't know if I have the shelf space or the financial incentive to keep up with these in the long run. Next book I have here is The Vampire Lestat by Anne Rice. I got this really cute tiny mass market paperback version from this big kind of like half-price book type store in North Carolina. And I'm super excited to have this because I really want to reread The Vampire Lestat, honestly pretty soon, and do like full annotations in it. And I figured this would be a great version of the book to carry around with me to do that. This also reminds me a lot more of the version of The Vampire Lestat I initially read from back when I read it in high school, which I'm pretty sure my initial copies of Interview with the Vampire, Vampire Lestat, and Queen of the Damned I got rid of sometime in college, which I'm definitely kicking myself and regretting that I don't still have my original versions of them. But I now have this version that I can love and read from instead. Okay, the next book I have here is The Last Sun by Katie Edwards. This is the start of the Tarot Sequence series, which I think is like a set of different 3 trilogies. Currently, only the first trilogy is finished, and I originally had bought the second book, but I finally got the first book on Pango, and I'm super excited to eventually start the series. I've heard it's very funny and also very like supernatural coded, which honestly, that's the kind of like cheesy fantasy romance schlock I'm looking for, so hopefully this book will be very good. Okay, the next book is actually one of the most recent additions to my collection, and that is the paperback edition of Fourth Wing. This is the new like first print run special edition with the sprayed edges on it of the dragons, so it's kind of a inverse of what I think the original hardcover was. And I have gone through and added some tabs in this book already. As you might have seen from a recent wrap-up or reading vlog, I have become like kind of mildly obsessed with the Empyrean series. I was like a moderate fan of Fourth Wing when I read it initially, but shockingly, something about Iron Flame just like really did it for me. And I'm very much obsessed with these characters and this world now. So I decided I wanted to go ahead and buy the books when they come out in like whatever the special edition of the paperbacks is. Since the hardbacks are just way too large, I do not have space on my bookshelf to carry them, but these ones are a much more manageable size. And I also really just vastly prefer the gold on black versus the black on gold that the original hardcovers have. So I'm very excited to see what they eventually do with the Iron Flame paperback, but I'm very excited in the meantime to go through and reread some of the sections of Fourth Wing, kind of tab and like refresh myself on some of the lore that I definitely forgot between reading the first and second book. Okay, the next book I have here is The God of Endings by Jacqueline Holland. This is a adult kind of like literary fantasy that I believe focuses on a female vampire. I have heard a lot of really good things about this book. The topic and like the themes of it seem very much up my alley and what I really like in vampire stories. So I'm super excited to eventually check this out, hopefully within the next month. And we actually now are on to the last book, which is actually the most recent book that I bought, and that is A Dark and Drowning Tide by Alison Saft. This is the most recent special edition I gotten from Illumicrate, which was from their September box. And it is incredibly beautiful. I did not know they were going to do an entirely like redesigned cover for this book, and I think it looks really good. Under the dust jacket we have these like different illustrations of magical creatures, and then on the hardback itself there's a printing of what the original like US cover of this book looks like, which I think is a really nice touch and definitely something different than what they usually do. Super excited to check this out. Lesbian, dark academia, fantasy romance seems like a lot of things that are normally up my alley, so hopefully this book does not disappoint. So that is a full look at all of the books I bought recently. I say bought recently, but I definitely have like one more book on pre-order that's probably coming out in the next like 2 weeks. So maybe I should have waited to film this video until I actually had that one. However, I don't anticipate buying too many more books before the end of the year. I probably will get like 1 or 2 more books for Christmas, but in general, this is all the books I'm planning on having for the rest of 2024. And overall, I'm just happy and excited that I have all of these books. And I'm really itching to read more of my physical TBR in the future as well. And I think I have a great selection here to choose from when it comes time to pick my next book. So with that all said, we are at the end of the video. Thank you guys as always so much for watching. If you guys enjoyed this video, consider liking, commenting, or subscribing if you aren't already. Consider following me on the Storygraph if you'd like to see my reading updates in real time, as well as following my Bookstagram, which is linked in the description. And that is going to be it for me today. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I will see you all in the next video. Bye!